My name is Sean Culhane. I am a success manager based out of Melbourne, Australia. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this event. I work on a team of success managers who look after the enterprise group in Australia and New Zealand. With me on stage, I have Diego Carburetti, who is one of REA's click to configure developers, and we've got Shane Williams, the executive. You keep changing your title. The executive manager of enterprise customer platforms at REA Group. We also have David Dawson, who regrettably could not be with us today. So Dave is actually going to join us via a Google Hangout towards the end of the presentation. Dave is the architect of the release process that we're going to take you through today. So we'll be able to get all your questions answered. One of the things I love about my job is I work with customers who teach me as much as I try to teach them, and no organization has taught me more in the months that I've looked after them than REA Group, for reasons I think that will become quite self-evident. REA Group is an organization that is pure Agile, and we'll get into exactly how pure when I pass the mic over to the guys here. But traditionally, Salesforce as a platform is the speed demon of speed. It's the speed demon of the enterprise architecture. So it is actually the platform that is able to move and deploy the fastest. In practice, however, we usually take what's called a hybrid approach, because when you're developing Salesforce, most of the time you're drawing data from other systems and pushing data to other systems, and the development cycles on the contributing systems are actually much, much slower. So we don't move at the speed of Agile, we move at the speed of Agile plus the cascading release schedules. At REA, Salesforce was actually the slowpoke, if you can imagine. So REA was doing releases twice monthly, and that was, by contrast to what some of the other development teams were doing, considered to be quite slow. The other teams were working with different technologies, developing straight on things like AWS, and because they built everything themselves from scratch, they set up a situation where they could actually release at their leisure. When you take releasing at your leisure and you contrast it against 2-week release cycles, it seems a bit slow. So it seems like it was a really great case to implement a technology that Salesforce has released called DX. DX was designed with developers in mind. It was designed to help you achieve the kind of agility other groups you've seen achieve with minimal friction and using the tools that you know and love. So we introduced DX. DX is a collection of tools, again, that helps you bring all of this together. It gives you all the tools you need to build and construct and roll out a hyper-agile development and release process. Salesforce, we're all about democratizing access to this kind of technology. So DX as a concept might seem like it's deeply technical, but it's actually designed for everyone. Diego, my friend here, is a developer, but he's a click-to-configure developer, and he actually manages a significant part of this development and release process. So again, if you're in the room and you're an admin and you think, oh, geez, this is just too complex for me, think again. You can get your hands dirty with this technology, and you can leverage it to its fullest extent. So when we develop a product at Salesforce, we obviously have an outcome in mind. These are the outcomes that we aim to achieve. So we aim to increase an average of 44% new apps developed on a yearly basis. We aim to decrease, on average, the time it takes to release a new application or feature by 59%, aiming for a 5-year ROI of 478% to the tune of just under $250,000. So that's what we imagined we would potentially achieve with this technology, again, in academia in isolation. What I'm going to do now is pass the mic over to REA, this team here, who actually took this technology and did some pretty amazing things with it. So we're going to take a look at what we actually achieved in the hands of a customer. Shane.
Thanks, Sean. Go over here. So I want to, well, first of all, can I get a bit of a show of hands, people who aren't from Australia? Just raise your hand if you're not from us. Cool, okay. Give a bit of a sense of the room. So important, therefore, that I give you a little bit of a background to who we are and the market that we operate in, because it really plays into why we needed to look at this technology. I want to leave you with three things. One is, why was it that we did this? Secondly, how we did it. And thirdly, how you can do it. And even if I only achieve the last two, I think I've delivered something back to the Salesforce community. But I want to start with an anecdote, and I'll work through this as I go through because it really plays into the ethos of what we're about. So about 8 months ago, I was at a Salesforce dinner with a bunch of execs sitting around the table, went through the standard rigmarole of the Salesforce pitch, and then we were just sitting around chatting. And we're doing the usual, who you are, what do you do, where you're from. And the guy sitting next to me says, I can't remember his name, not important, but he says, I know a guy, I met him last week over in Silicon Valley, and I think he does exactly what you do. Okay, that's interesting. He says, I don't know what his title was, but he told me that he's responsible for the marketplace at Facebook, focusing on real estate. Now, what I'm about to tell you is that's our business. So that's an oh shit moment for me going, wow, it's real. We are, yes, we're the number one in our market, but while we were the disruptor 10, 20 years ago, we're now right for that. I'll come back to that in a second. Just to give you an idea of our footprint, we have two major orgs, one operating our Australian business and one operating our Asian business. We use Sales Cloud, fully Lightning, CPQ for our Asia business to do our contracting, and then for our our consumer business, as in all the people who are visiting our website, we use the Crux DMP. Our end-to-end leads to cash process on the Salesforce platform is integrated via MuleSoft into our ERP, which is NetSuite. We've got 6 countries, 6 languages, 7 currencies all operating in those platforms. So a little bit about REA. We have a 3-pillared strategy, and our aim in the game is to change the way the world experiences property. So our core business, which I'll talk more to in a second, is our property advertising business. Imagine North America, it's like a Zillow. But we're not just about the property experience. While that's our core business today, we're starting to expand into adjacencies. So we've recently moved into financial services and offering loans to customers. And we've bought a data business to really start to understand and provide data back to the environment around property advertising. And then our third pillar of our strategy is to take what we do really well in Australia and expand that globally. And as we go into these emerging markets in Asia, where the traditional the way that the property market operates today is very much print and billboard advertising, we would be set up for success so that we can really achieve the goals that we have in Australia globally. Here's a bit of our timeline, and whilst I won't go through it in detail, we started 20 odd years ago in a garage in a suburb of Melbourne with a couple of real estate agents. The internet was pretty young, we were talking dial-up modems and things, but they had this idea that eventually we would probably have people wanting to look at this stuff on the internet. Move 20 years later, and we are now the number one portal in Australia by a large factor. So compared to our nearest competitor, we're more than 2.5 times their viewership across all platforms, mobile, web. We get close to 75 million hits a month. And when you consider the population of Australia is only 25 million people, it's not an insignificant number. But I come back to the story at this dinner to a guy who says to me, hey, I met this guy who does the same job you do. And I think about, we're the number one property portal in Australia. We're in a market where we get several $100 million in revenue, and we operate on a pretty hefty margin. Ripe for the picking. We've gone from being the disruptor to the number one, and we know that there's big guys who have just as many eyeballs who are starting to think about this stuff. And so what's made us the number one and what's given us the agility and the ability to create and innovate products that our consumers love, we now have some pretty big guys knocking on the door. This is a bit of an insight into our footprint. So while we operate the largest portals in Australia, we also have significant investments in North America and in India. And we own the number one property portals across Asia, being several countries. What gives us the ability to innovate and go fast, and what I believe will give us the ability to maintain our stronghold on our market, is how REA operates and its culture. And this ties into why is DX for us. So I've got a quote here from our chief inventor. We're lucky because we have a culture of people who are resilient and can invent. And when I say it starts with our culture, I mean we are agile to our core. We have values which strongly represent us along the lines of giving back to the community, around being tolerant and accepting of all, and getting shit done. The core 3 tenets. Our Salesforce COE operates no differently. So whether you're a developer, a functional consultant, a BA, we take what we do seriously. We have to deliver fast, but we make sure we do it while we're having fun. Which leads to some of the titles that you might recognize here and the way we structure our teams. Now, you might substitute some of these names for solution architect or lead developer, but largely this is what our team structures look like. We have 3 squads operating Salesforce, largely structured like this. For those who aren't operating in scaled agile business, I'll give you a little bit of an insight into how that works. So each of these teams, we call them squads, operates with a hyper-focus. So we have a squad dedicated to Salesforce just looking after Australia. We have another 2 squads looking after Asia, one on our sales process and one on our contracting. Within each of the squads, a bunch of squads together, so we'll have squads also for integration and for our NetSuite teams. Together we call those a tribe. And there's multiple tribes across the business, focused on anything from enterprise apps, which is where we operate, Salesforce, NetSuite, so forth, through to custom software development for consumer, and those teams are embedded in the business. So we don't have tech and IT, so IT and business teams. We have business teams with tech people in them. They're what we call the tribes. And then we make sure that we have guilds and chapters that ensure that disciplines are across the board represented the same, people get career development opportunities and understand best practice. Take that outside of just the technical groups. This, when I say we combined and we don't have tech and business teams, I genuinely mean we don't have tech and business teams. They are combined. So when you talk about the money tribe, which is where we operate, closely aligned to finance and sales, we have tribes around facilities, procurement, customer operations, finance. Give you an idea, these are the teams that you would not traditionally expect to be technical. The photo in the center is our legal team at their daily stand-up. This is a bunch of lawyers standing around talking about what's coming at us today, what are we working on, what do we need to target. So our journey to agility. If I come back to what are we talking about, we're a highly agile business that's been very successful in our market. We're ripe for disruption, and all the teams, as Sean talked about before, other than ours, have continuous integration and continuous delivery on a standard tool set. Yet for us, we were currently operating on 2-week sprints, fortnightly releases. Now, I talk to some other corporate customers and they say, well, 2 weeks would be awesome. We're looking at 6 monthly releases. For us, it's just not good enough. So without further ado, I might get young Diego to talk you through how that works.
So to give you a better understanding of where we've gone, I thought it's best to give you an understanding of where we came from. So this is our development flow before we transitioned across to DX. And many of you might find this very familiar. We used sandboxes, typically 2 development environments, each one of them with a pre-development environment that we use for any widespread changes. And we would alternate between these on our 2-week sprints. That way we kept them fresh and a recent copy of production. We also had a spike sandbox that we would spin up as required for any changes that would be disruptive to our development flow or that we just weren't sure about. Now, from this, everyone would work on whatever feature they were working on, and once it was ready to go to test, they would package it up. We used Flowsum as our packaging tool. We would take a snapshot and cherry pick out the components that we needed, create that into a patch. Now, this enabled us to deploy that patch wherever we wanted to on the connected orgs. But you could achieve the same result using another tool out there or using change sets. So this would happen throughout the first 8 days of the iteration. We would make the features, we would deploy them into our test environment, sometimes test them. But then around about lunchtime, we would drop tools. So lunchtime on the second Wednesday of the iteration, day 8, we would drop all tools, make sure that we got all testing done. We don't skip over it. And once that was all ready, we would merge all those packages together and deploy it into our staging environment. From there, we would spend the next couple of hours doing a verification test, and then on working day 9, we would deploy that into production. So while it all seems fairly straightforward, and we've got a thorough process, we still face the same challenge that many of you developers also face out there. We're all human, we make mistakes. Errors can be very small, or they can be catastrophic for your deployment. We also didn't have much of a source control. Lots of our code, we manually checked in and checked out of a GitHub repository, but outside of that, there wasn't much point in source controlling any of the configuration because it's really difficult to keep track of. Our environments, everyone needed to have full admin access into, and this would cause them to get out of sync, which meant that something that worked in test then wouldn't work in production when you deployed it. With the changes that we sent through, these being inside a package were very difficult to actually review what was getting deployed. So you'd have an understanding of what it was inside the test environment, but you're approving something which may be very different to what was tested. And at day 8, we dropped all tools. This is the whole team basically stopping their work, and we would lose a couple of days. Now, it was really good if everything went into production and worked smoothly, but sometimes, even Fridays, which we would leave to our rituals normally, we would have to delay our rituals and get back on the tools and try to fix things that went wrong. So that was glacial for us. We needed something which we call ludicrous mode. The rest of our organisation can deploy to production within a day, realistically. We were every 2 weeks. So we needed a faster solution, and that's where DX came into it. So to take you through what we actually built, I would have passed across to Dave, but with him not being here, I'll pass you across to virtual Dave.
Before we get into the weeds of building automation pipelines, we started looking at our current release process and development environments to try and simplify both the number of orgs that we have to maintain, as well as the process features must follow before entering a production org. If we were going to put a lot of energy into optimizing our delivery process, we wanted to get the basics right first. We deliberated as a squad and came up with the following 3 key principles. The developers needed their own environments to work in, we needed a shared and integrated environment to test, and we needed an environment to have practice runs for production. The environments for developers was a perfect use case for Scratch orgs, which allowed us to simplify the number of sandboxes we had to maintain down to 2, test and staging. Developers can work in their own Scratch orgs, building and unit testing their features, and via source control we intended to deploy those features to the test environment to be functional tested and regression if required. Then, a couple of times in iteration, we would push all ready features to staging, perform a quick sanity test, and then push on to production. We hope to achieve completely automated package builds and deployments, including destructive changes, to minimize human involvement. Automation means less error-prone and repeatable deployments. Anyone in the team can deploy, developers spend less time deploying and more time developing, and of course, you'll have noticed in this environment strategy the lack of spike, develop, and pre-develop environments. If developers adopted Scratch orgs, they could be used for whatever purpose they require, be it a spike, a feature build, or even a hotfix. After all, Scratch orgs are designed to be quickly spun up and just as easily thrown away. So we rolled all of these existing orgs into this one bucket, which greatly reduced our squad's ongoing maintenance. It is important to understand the key differences between a Scratch org and a sandbox. A Scratch org is much closer to a traditional local environment than a production mirror. And where a sandbox can last indefinitely and requires constant refreshing to stay up to date, a Scratch org has a minimum lifespan of 30 days and is the responsibility of the individual developer who created it, as opposed to the general Salesforce team or administrator. This environment strategy that utilizes local environments and having minimal sandboxes to maintain is very commonplace throughout the industry. So developers that have worked outside of the Salesforce ecosystem should be fairly familiar with these concepts. DX gives Salesforce developers the capabilities that other developers have had for years now. So it may seem like unfamiliar territory picking up DX for the first time, but when it comes to environment strategies, source control strategies, and even overall CI strategies, there are plenty of well-documented industry standards that I would recommend researching to give any DX. One other thing that you may have noticed is that there's no defined time scope on any features that have moved throughout our orgs. We no longer have defined times when we drop features. The squad commits to delivering X amount of features in a given iteration, but that no longer means that all features must drop on the second last day of the iteration. We release often, meaning each drop is smaller, the support required for each drop is significantly less, and the end users can utilize new features as soon as they are ready. With the environment strategy defined and agreed upon, we started researching the tooling we would require to build the CI pipeline. Salesforce DX may be new, but continuous integration has been around for years, so we looked to the engineering teams within REA to understand how they implement CI/CD, the tooling they use, the source control and deployment integrations, as well as the do's and don'ts that they have refined over years of iterations and knowledge sharing. Our engineering teams used GitHub Enterprise as their source control platform, and a Melbourne-based product called Builkite as the software driving our build pipelines. This initiative was about bridging the gaps between our own Salesforce engineering squad's tooling and development processes with that of non-SaaS focused engineering squads, as much as it was an intent to streamline and optimize our overall delivery process. So we felt it best to align ourselves with the larger REA engineering practices, especially given the amount of support available to us internally. Continuous integration is traditionally source code and config focused, so this requirement, as well as our curiosity for any new tech on the market, led us to adopt DX. And in conjunction with GitHub Enterprise and Builkite, we had the 3 pillars to our CI solution. One thing that has been left out on purpose is developer tooling. Developers work best in an environment that makes them feel comfortable. This is the OS flame wars, Mac OS versus Windows versus Linux. There are developers who live and die by IDEs versus developers who prefer lightweight text editors. And there are some that prefer GitHub clients and there are some that prefer Git Bash. In the grand scheme of things, it makes no difference at all, as long as developers can commit their changes. So we were purposely not prescriptive. DX gives developers the flexibility to use whatever tooling they like, and we saw that as a huge benefit. So next came the Git strategy. Our Git strategy is a slight modification to the standard GitHub flow, but we kept it as simple as possible. We have 2 persistent branches, master and develop. The Git strategy, as well as our CI integrations, are best described in a day in the life of a developer scenario. So let's walk through this process. A developer picks up a cart and begins building a feature in a feature branch. When they have completed build, which includes both manual unit testing as well as unit testing via code coverage, they raise a pull request into the develop branch. This PR is blocked until 2 gates are passed. A member of our team, designated with the right amount of access, needs to review and approve the pull request, and the feature needs to pass a verification compile, which runs all test classes to ensure that the changes will deploy without failure and has sufficient coverage, which is orchestrated. This automated check from Builkite is the first of 3 CI integrations we've built into our GitHub repository. If those 2 gates are passed, the feature can be merged into our develop branch, which automatically kicks off the second integration into CI. This is a deployment to test. Our build pipeline in Builkite is intelligent enough to look at the commit in GitHub and determine what changes the developer has actually made, and package only that source, as well as what the developer has deleted, if of course there is any deletions, and generate a destructive package XML, again with only the source that they have deleted. By default, it will push the changes followed by the destructive changes, but if required, we can tell Builkite to do those steps in reverse order, if the deployment has such a dependency. Any other features that are ready to be released into our test environment are released in the same way. And once we have a handful of features tested and ready to go, we can raise another pull request in GitHub, this time to merge the changes that are in our develop branch into our master branch. When this pull request is raised, Builkite calculates what has changed between the develop and master branch, and creates the relevant packages, again, containing only the changed source. But this time the package will represent all of the features that are in develop that aren't currently in master. Builkite deploys these changes to staging and pauses, which is the third integration between our GitHub repository and our CI, and will only proceed to production if someone jumps into the deployment screen and clicks continue manually. This gives us time to run a verification test in staging, and when we are happy, we continue the deployment in Builkite, which tags the commit in the master branch which resulted in a production deployment for traceability, and performs the exact same deployment that was deployed into staging into production. This automation has been fine-tuned over the couple of months we've had it live, but there are a few things that we have purposely avoided. You'll notice we keep mentioning CI, but not CD. That is, continuous integration, but not continuous delivery. Our deployments are not automatically dropped end-to-end due to the platform's lack of reversion capabilities. If something were to go wrong, we may face difficulty backing it out. We still have a confirmation step between the staging and production deployments, where someone must instruct Builkite to deploy to production when we are certain the deployment has a high chance of success. Our pipeline does theoretically give us reversion by reversing the last pull request into master, but this would not have been tested in that given scenario and is not guaranteed to work. Also, despite DX giving us the capability to modularize our codebase, we decided against it for now. Our developers are used to working within monolithic sandboxes, and our codebase is very tightly coupled end-to-end through both schema, configuration, and codebase, with reusable service and helper classes throughout. We may one day look to modularize our codebase to further reduce the regression requirements, but it is not something we wanted to tackle on day one. Our entire production org is currently represented in one single DX project. Finally, our Git strategy of having persistent develop branch before the master branch means we cannot cherry-pick features that are released between the test and staging and production orgs. All features that have been merged to test either need to be deployed or reverted before a production deployment starts, depending on their readiness. This was a large change for our development teams and was a sore point during adoption. But once the process was adopted throughout, we found this actually added additional rigor to our delivery pipeline, and we are currently on the fence as to whether this is something we intend to keep or something we intend to iterate and change.
I think we'll cut Virtual Dave off. He's starting to get a bit boring. Sorry, Virtual Dave. So I started this with why was our need to change? And our need to change being we are in a highly competitive market, the rest of our organisation is highly agile, and we wanted to achieve the same. We've talked about how we did it, and hopefully a lot of the technical pieces that David just talked you through made sense to most of the room. But as an agile organisation, we also like to measure ourselves and understand and learn as we go. So you saw these stats up there before that I guess are academic and come to us from Salesforce. What I wanted to take you through very quickly was what did we achieve? So remembering that our target was speed. We weren't necessarily targeting getting new apps in or increasing the number of apps or targeting a financial saving. It was purely targeted on speed. And where Salesforce said that we would probably gain about a 60% efficiency rate, we got 300%. So we're down from 2-week deployments to sub 2 days. Ideally, what it means is we can push, once a piece of code is ready, we can push it within 20 minutes. But generally, it'll take about 3 days to develop a card. So, what did we learn? Yeah, go.
So on the more technical side of our learnings, some of the things that we learned really started when we first started this journey, and that was converting an existing org that had been around for years and had lots of development into a new project. We basically had Dave working 3 months flat on this. So we needed a lot of knowledge of the metadata API, and while converting your org to a project is fairly straightforward. It's not until you actually go to deploy it into a Scratch org that you find out just where it goes wrong. Anything that's hard-coded in or any pre-dependencies that haven't been built on your Scratch org, they'll cause the deployment to fail. And we had about 1,600 errors on the first try. And you needed to work through them manually. Now, one fix might address 400 of those errors, but it's still a tedious process to get through it. Now, this is going to become a lot easier in some of the new features that have been released in DX on the Winter 19 release, but we went through the hard yards on it. Some of the other things that we found is that there is no support for CPQ in DX. So CPQ works lots of its configuration out through data in the system. And while you can use data trees to try to push and pull some of that data across, it's not really very supportive. So we ended up building our own CLI for CPQ just to be able to manage this, and we're still working on it today. Declarative developers like myself, I've never used GitHub before starting this. So I've learned GitHub, I've learned to be able to use the CLI. It's really easy if you do some coaching, some pairing, and that's what we found worked really well, to the point that one of our teams now does not use any of our tech leads to go through this, and we run iteration after iteration without any help. The first deployment is typically going to be bumpy. Best recommendation is to give yourself time, have a DR plan, and make it small. And the other area that we've found that was somewhat challenging is around profiles and permission sets. We've found lots of information on the profile will get stripped out when you try to retrieve it from your Scratch org. Then you deploy it and end up crippling your production environment. What we've ended up doing to combat that is we manually go through and edit the XML files using VS Code or whatever else, rather than relying on what was built by the Scratch org. So again, I'll pass to Virtual Dave 2.0, which might be a bit speedier in telling you what's next for us.
Virtual Dave is offline.
That's all right.
Let's go with backup Virtual Dave.
All right. Hi, I'm backup Virtual Dave. So when we talk about the enhanced recipe, it's all great, and we're really happy with what we've achieved and the speed that we've maybe been managed to get out of the solution so far, but there's a lot more we can do. Our target is to introduce automated code testing and automated regression testing and automated code review. We think that by using tools such as Selenium and CodeScan, that we'll be able to get additional speed. Oh, and there's Virtual Dave. Thanks for coming back. We think that the new recipe is going to give us significant increase in velocity, and I'll talk to that in a second. But next steps for us is obviously, as I said, we need to continue to improve on the CPQ CLI, bring it back into alignment with the Salesforce CLI, and we want to get our automated regression testing sorted. We then want to explore using Scratch orgs to test support for per feature development, as opposed to what we're doing now as the master branch stuff. Automating code checks for pull requests with a tool like CodeScan. And then I have no idea what this means, but Virtual Dave is really close to this. Taking advantage of force source deploy command. I hope somebody else knows what that means.
I know what that is.
There we go.
So as I mentioned before, there's two new features coming out with DX, which is force source deploy and retrieve. These commands let you hit a standard environment as opposed to a Scratch org with deploying your metadata packages. Currently, we're using Ant for our packaging, and that's all scripted inside Builkite, but Ant's getting deprecated, so we need to switch across to something else. The ideal would be to use the deploy command, which will allow us to use DX to push that data straight into production.
You can take that one.
And I'll take this one as well. So the other area that we're looking at taking advantage of is a pilot that will be starting up soon on using snapshots from production. I've heard the term shape being used, but I'm not sure whether that's sticking. But it allows you to take a snapshot of production and use that as a template for creating your Scratch orgs. This will mean that we no longer have to have each of the developers creating a Scratch org and then manually deploying every single installed package and changing some of the features inside it, such as turning on multiple accounts to contacts, history tracking, multiple contacts on events, and so forth. These are all manual steps that we currently have, and if we could automate them or remove them from the process altogether, I anticipate that we'll save half a day for each developer.
Cool. So you saw our earlier metrics. We think that the automation of testing, code review, and some of the additional features that are coming in the next release will allow us to achieve even more velocity. Just keep clicking, mate. So what we're targeting is, again, increased velocity. We think once we get to a point where we no longer have to do manual code review, that we'll be able to pump more of our resource back into additional features. So we're expecting that number to lift slightly to 15%. But really, we want to raise the bar on how quickly can we go. So we want to get to 400% just by automating these two pieces. And we genuinely feel, based on what we're seeing in the roadmap for DX and based on some of our current plans, that that's achievable. So you now know how we did it. And to find out how you can do it, we'll let Salesforce take over.
I'm Salesforce. Hello. So how can you guys get involved in all of this? You have everything you need right now as Salesforce customers. We're going to recommend a few resources. For starters, enable a dev hub in a business or production org, which can be done straight from the admin console. You can even get a trial org if you would prefer to do this outside of your conventional environment. 30-day free trial is available at sfdc.co/capdx-trial-org. We're going to make these slides available to you, so don't stress. You don't need to write that down. If and when you go down this path, make sure you log on to the Trailblazer community. There is a community, there's a group in particular set up for DX. Everyone is trying to solve for the same or very similar challenges. Leverage the wisdom of the crowd, post your questions, answer questions, get involved. We're all in this together. And surprise, surprise, there are badges on Trailhead. This is a really, really great collection of badges for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're a beginner, even if you've not touched Agile at all, you can get started and build a baseline understanding of how all of this works, not only from a technical perspective, but from a functional perspective. And again, as I'm fond of saying, to access Trailhead, you need exactly two things, an email address and a pulse. And I'm assuming you guys all have both of those. You can follow REA's progress. REA is a very social organization. They post, they have an excellent series of blog entries at blog-rea-group.com. They have posted their GitHub repository, so you can take a look at some of the source and some of the materials behind what they've achieved. Check out some DX stories. Certainly, we do not have the monopoly on being clever here. There's many folks who have done similar achievements in this room. We love to capture these stories and make them available. We want you guys to succeed as much as possible. And of course, there's a Dreamforce 18 DX trail. If you'd like to alter course and focus on DX for the balance of the week, you can hit sfdc.co/dx@df18. It will take you straight to a trail that outlines a schedule that highlights everything you need to know about DX at this event. And with that, we're going to do something very experimental. Obviously, we're going to open up to questions, but we no longer have virtual Dave. We have actual Dave. Dave is joining us from Melbourne.
This is the part where the tech fails.
No, patience. You can see my desktop. Ladies and gentlemen, virtual Dave. Dave, you're on screen. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Certainly, we've got Dave online as well. We've got a few questions over here. Do we have a mic?
Do we have a mic?
Yeah, there's one over there.
It's all right.
Sorry, just 1 minute, because the next session is going to be coming in.
Okay, very quick questions, and we'll hang out outside to answer more.
Yeah, so we merge our feature branches into develop. They will sit there.
Okay.
They will sit and develop until everything in develop is tested. Then we merge it across to master.
I think he's saying no to us that he can't hear you.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Dave, you're on mute, and we'll repeat the next question. We only have time for one more.
That's a brilliant presentation. Everyone wants to get half where you are.
Yeah.
The downstream environment, if you do agile jobs, how do you collate if they're still doing waterfall or all your platforms doing those agile?
Do you want to repeat the question so Dave can see?
So if you're doing a feature and you need to change downstream platform, say for instance integration, do they have to sync that up with user production, or are they still using like they do agile jobs?
Yes, they're doing agile drops is the short answer to that question. Yes. Anyone else before we get booted out? Yeah, go. Cool. So Dave, how do you deal with things that DX doesn't currently support, like sharing rules?
There are some things that don't need to be perfect in these developer environments. So we've had a couple of issues with things like approval processes and, to your point, sharing rules. But I mean, the environment only needs to be as good as the developers need for them to be able to build their features. So there are some things that are tedious and do still require manual kind of work that, I mean, realistically, probably less than 5% of the work that we do now still requires things like manual deployments and maybe even sandbox to sandbox configuration through to production. So all I would say is there are some metadata types that aren't explicitly supported by DX, but we found that if you have some patience, you can actually work, and a lot of these issues can be resolved by yourself.
Okay, Dave, hang out. We'll take you with us.